Hello, I'm Frances from Winstead Homestead, and this is my bounty. We have had a wonderful season. Of course, this isn't all that 4 people will eat for the winter, but for our first growing season in this area, I'm pretty excited to have this much. I didn't know if I'd have anything. I think our squash was the most abundant. The zucchini and the yellow crookneck was amazing. We ate our fill for sure. I was also able to preserve quite a bit in the freezer. I have a dozen gallon-size freezer bags, yellow crookneck, and I have 10 gallon-size freezer bags of zucchini. And they're just quartered and chunked for soups and casseroles and stir fries, things like that. I also have 4 gallon-size bags of zoodles that I froze. I probably would have done a lot more zoodles, but I didn't realize I could freeze them. We ate a lot fresh. Then I also have 8 bags of grated zucchini, and there's about 2 good-sized cups for my zucchini bread. My zucchini bread recipe does 2 loaves of zucchini bread, and it calls for 2 cups. So that's how I preserved it. Now I also have 2 jars of elderberry syrup. I didn't grow any elderberry trees, but I did find along the roadside some elderberries. I was watching them from the time they were blooming. And when I saw that they were ripe, we stopped off the side of the road, pulled out some bags, and picked a bunch of elderberries. And we got 2 quarts of it. Now I didn't preserve, I just keep that in the refrigerator. I also got 5 quarts of green beans, and we ate so much fresh, but we just couldn't keep up with it for a period of time, and I was able to can 5 quarts, and we love canned green beans, so this will be great. Probably not as much as we'll eat in winter, but it's still a good start. I have 6 quarts of salsa verde, and this was made from our tomatillos. And it is delicious. We also used the jalapenos that we grew and our own cilantro to make it. I have 5 quarts of dill pickles. And these are ones that I actually hot water bathed using vinegar to preserve. I did 5 quarts of fermented dill pickles, and I have 4 more in the process. So I think I have enough pickles for the year. We'll be fine with those. We did 6 pints of the roasted salsa, and this is with the red tomatoes, and we fire roast on the barbecue grill the tomatoes and the jalapenos and the onions and garlic, so that way it's all roasted. It has a wonderful flavor. I definitely don't have enough of these. It would be great if we had more. Maybe next year. I have a dozen pints of the tomato sauce that I make. It's an all-purpose tomato sauce, and it's great for flavoring it for chilies or flavoring it for pasta or pizza or anything that you want tomato sauce in. It's that all-purpose that you buy the little 8-ounce cans, just like that. And I definitely don't have enough of those, but it's a good start, and I hope to be able to do more. I did quite a few last year, but not this many, so I hope to be getting better and better each year. Now, I still have a little bit of dill pickle relish from what I made last year. So I did make some dill pickle relish this year from my cucumbers. I didn't have very many cucumbers to work with this year. They just didn't produce that great. But I was able to get at least 1 batch, which is about 7 or 8 pint jars of dill pickle relish. And it'll probably be enough. We don't go through that much relish, but it's great to have on hand. I did about 20 pints of a sweet pickle relish, and I used my zucchini for that one. It seemed to have turned out great. It was a great use of my zucchini, and I know I have enough for the winter of the sweet pickle relish. I also have for my storage 6 butternut squash. And they're a winter squash, and so they're going to be able to preserve probably through the whole winter. But we love butternut squash, and I use it to make lots of pumpkin products like pumpkin chocolate chip cookies and pumpkin pie and pumpkin cheesecake and pumpkin roll. I could name many different things that I like to make. But I love the butternut squash instead of pumpkin because it's a richer, meatier flesh. And I also enjoy the taste a little bit better when it comes to butternut squash soup or using it in curries. I still have 8 or 10 more on the vine in the garden that I didn't pick when I harvested because they still had a little bit more green veining. And I'm hoping next week we're going to have a few days of warmer temperatures, and I'm hoping that they will yellow up a little better before I pick them. But we should have at least a dozen or so of the butternut squash. It may not be enough for the whole winter, but it's a lot more than I expected to get, so I'm pretty excited about it. I also saved seeds for the first time. The dill seed and the cilantro seed are a pretty easy seed to save, and I've done those before. And they're abundant. But I had never saved the melon seeds. And so I have a watermelon seeds that are heirloom from Baker Creek. I have cantaloupe seeds and I have honeydew seeds. And they did pretty good. Well, the cantaloupe didn't do real great. I only got one of those. But the honeydew and the watermelon did really well and they tasted really good. And I'm very excited to be able to save the seeds. And hopefully the cantaloupe will do better next season. My corn didn't do very well this season, but I did get enough at least to save the seeds. So hopefully I will be able to try them again another year. I have some cherry tomato seeds that I'm soaking to be able to preserve. They're a lot harder. They're real tiny. Hopefully I can get them though, because the red cherry tomato seeds that my sister-in-law and brother gave me, I ended up with only 1 cherry tomato bush from that. All the others didn't seem to make it. But my goodness, they were delicious. They were such a good tasting cherry tomato. And it was a deep red and they were real good size. So I'm trying really hard to save those seeds. I'm hoping I can. Now, the one thing that I don't have out here on the table is my green tomato mincemeat. I still have 2 jars left over from last year, which I'm going to be using up today. I, of course, will be making some green tomato mincemeat pie, a family favorite. However, some people might not think to put up green tomato mincemeat because there might not be a lot of uses for it. I thought I would show you one use that I've done that is just very versatile. It's a breakfast bar that I've used many different fruits in. I've used blackberry, I've done apple, where I've used the apple pie filling that I've made and preserved. I've also done figs from dried figs in the breakfast bar. And so it's just a very easy recipe that you can use just about any fruit as the filling. And I wanted to show you how I put that together. I also want to show you how I put together my green tomato mincemeat. You know, a lot of these things here, if I hadn't done it before, like the fermenting or the sweet pickle relish made with zucchini, I just go online and find a recipe or watch a YouTube video. And that's how I learned how to freeze the zucchini noodles. And so I haven't demonstrated how to do any of these things because there's so much already on the internet of recipes and how-to videos. But one thing that I didn't find was a green tomato mincemeat video. There were a few recipes, not the same ones that I use, and there were a few mincemeat demonstration videos, but not green tomato mincemeat demonstration. And so I thought, well, maybe that's something that would be useful because everybody has leftover green tomatoes when the weather changes. I know a lot of people will just give them to their chickens or their pigs or whatever, but I love to be able to make use of it. And green tomato mincemeat is something my mother made. Even my Aunt Pearl, her sister, gave me the same recipe. So I'm sure it was something that was used in the early 1900s, if not further back, by their mother. And it's just been so delicious and a wonderful way to use the green tomatoes. As I said last week, we do also now make the salsa verde with green tomatoes instead of only out of the tomatillos. And that's delicious as well. And we will be making use of some of that. But the green tomato mincemeat is just delicious. And I would love to be able to show you how I put that together and a way to use it. Okay, so I have a green tomato mincemeat recipe that was given to me by my aunt, my mother's sister, Aunt Pearl. And it's the same one that my mother made when I was growing up. And so I'm sure it goes back to their mother. So who knows how many generations back it goes. But this green tomato mincemeat uses some vinegar and some salt, which in the videos that I saw, they didn't have that. I start out with 2 cups of brown sugar and 1 cube of butter. And then I also do 2 to 3 apples. I need 3 cups of apples, and depending on the size of apples, this is going to determine how many I need. I'm first going to get those measured out. Now what I've done is I use just the green Granny Smith apple because it has a good tartness and it's firm, so it holds up well in cooking. And I peel them, core them, and slice and dice. Now, a lot of times, most of the time, I do several batches at once. I'll 2, 3, 4 times the recipe because I'll have a lot of green tomatoes that I need to make up into green tomato mincemeat. But I'm just going to do one recipe and follow it. I've modified this recipe a little bit. Originally, it calls for 3 cups of sugar, 1 brown and 2 white. But I have modified it a little bit so that there's not quite as much sugar. I just do 2 cups of brown sugar. And it doesn't make a noticeable difference as far as I can tell in the flavor. And other ways that I've modified the recipe is when I do the green tomatoes. If I have a whole lot of green tomatoes, and of course this was mostly before I started doing salsa verde with green tomatoes, so I was trying to use up the green tomatoes. And I would make a lot of mincemeat, and so I would do equal parts. The recipe calls for 3 cups of apples and 2 cups of green tomatoes. I've even in the past traded that and done 2 cups of apples and 3 cups of green tomatoes. But for the purposes of demonstration, I'm following it just exactly, except for I'm only using 2 cups of brown sugar instead of adding another cup of white. So we've got 1 cup of apples there. That's 2. and that's about 3/4. So let's see how much green tomatoes we have. For the green tomatoes, I'm going to be using my food processor because these are small green tomatoes. When I've had large green tomatoes, I'll just chop them up by hand when they're large, but when they're small, that's just a lot more chopping intricately. So I've chosen to use the food processor. I've done it another time and it worked out fine. What I do is I just take these small green tomatoes and I cut them in quarters just to give them a head start. And I fill it up about half full. And then I just chop it up. And it's a coarse chop, it doesn't have to be real fine. And that's just about all it needs. So I only need 2 cups of this, but I was a 1/4 cup shy of apples. So we'll see, if I have 2 cups and 1/4, I'll probably go ahead and just have that little bit extra, just to have the full amount of fruit. Okay, that's 1, 2, that looks like 1/4. That should be just right. Now I also need 2 cups of raisins. 1, 2. The next thing I need is to grate the rind of an orange. Try not to get the white. That can give it a bitter flavor, so you don't want to get white in there. Just the outer zest. Now after grating the zest off of the orange, then we need to chop up the pulp and add it as well. I just kind of break it up a little bit. It'll break up a lot more as it cooks because it's going to cook for quite a while. Now we're also going to add a 1/4 cup of just white vinegar. Now it's my guess that the vinegar is a way of having some replacement of maybe the meat product. Originally, mincemeat was made from meat, suet, and that's why we put the butter in there to replace the oils from that. And I think the vinegar is probably for the same reason. Now we also need some salt. It calls for 1 teaspoon of salt. And it calls for 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. And 1 teaspoon allspice. And 1 teaspoon of cloves. Now we're going to take all of these ingredients and heat them up. And the juices from the fruits, as well as the melted butter, you don't have to add any other liquid in there. And I put it on a medium high and just stir it occasionally so that things don't get scorched on the bottom. It's smelling wonderful already. While that's heating up, I'm going to clean up. We're getting more and more juices as it's warming up. The brown sugar is melting and so is the butter. The juices are coming out of the fruits. The whole idea is just to cook this down until it gets a nice thick consistency like a pie filling. Here it is. It's starting to get to a boil, and all of the butter has melted, as well as the sugar. As you can see, I'm using an enamel-coated cast iron pot. I prefer to use this sort of thing when I'm making tomato sauces and jams and things, because it's less likely to scorch and it heats up really well. And you can see it's well used. I've got chips on the handles and the white coating is very discolored. Once it gets up to a nice rolling boil, I will turn it down and just let it simmer for a couple hours. It really fills the house with an amazing smell with the allspice and cloves and cinnamon and the orange rind and apples. It's just amazing. Okay, we're getting a good boil, so I'm going to turn it down to simmer and let it cook for a couple hours. So this is the consistency you want it to look like. There's very little liquid left and it's all pretty much incorporated together. And as it cools, it'll be less visible as well. It was for about between 2 and 3 hours, and it was maybe 2.5 total. It really is delicious. This is the one jar I have left from last year. And I'm going to make a breakfast bar. Now the recipe for this breakfast bar is really easy. All we do is make an oatmeal brown sugar crumb. I use whole wheat flour, and we just press it onto the bottom of the pan. It uses melted butter. And so you don't even have to cut the butter into the dry ingredients. There, it's just pressed nice and firm. And it's very easy to just add whatever filling you like. I always use a fruit filling. And like I said, I've used berry, I've used apple pie filling, I've used cherry, whatever I had on hand. I use this for a replacement of granola bars, for when I'm traveling, for a quick, easy breakfast. I like this jar. I found it at a thrift store. It uses the regular lid. I was needing jars. I found that last year. I prefer to try to get used jars if I can, because I usually need so many and I can't afford that many new. So I do what I can to get used ones at yard sales, estate sales, letting my friends know I'm looking for jars. I always check thrift stores first before I go to get something new. And it's that simple. You just spread it out and then you just scatter the crumbs on top. After making the crust, I put aside about 1.5 cups to just spread on top. The oven is already preheated to 350 and it's going to bake for 25 minutes. I always set the timer because I forget. It's too easy for me to forget that I have something in the oven or cooking. Okay. Well, through the magic of video, we'll see what that looks like in just a moment. By the magic of video, here is the completed breakfast bar made with the mincemeat for a filling. I'm going to cut a piece out so you can see how it looks. It's real pretty in layers. It's rather warm. When it cools down, it'll hold together really well. Isn't that beautiful? It really tastes good. I'm so grateful you joined me this week to see all of the food preservation I've done this season. I can't wait to show you the progress I've made on the 3 acres of our field. Until we meet again.